Hello and welcome in. I am Greg Smith, recruiting extraordinaire for Hail Varsity. I am joined by Steve Mark, staff writer of Hail Varsity. We're back for another week of the recruiting question video of the week. Steve, how are you this morning?
I'm doing great, Greg. Just some breaking news here. Tiger Woods might compete at the Masters. So I'm not a huge golf guy, but if Tiger's going to pull this off, yeah, I'll watch.
Yeah, I feel like that a lot of people fall into that category. Not a big golf guy or gal, but if Tiger is playing, and especially after what happened with the accident, like you'll tune in. I think that's already like I didn't know that the Masters week was here until I started seeing stuff about Tiger Woods potentially playing. So that goes to tell you still like his presence in that sport.
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty busy weekend for Nebraska athletics, right? With the spring game on Saturday, Rutgers, the baseball team, coming to town as kind of like a test to see if the baseball team's sweep of Ohio State was for real or not real. So, and then also the Masters when everybody goes home on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So.
Yeah, that'll be a ton of fun. It'll be a great sports weekend coming off of what was just recently a really good sports weekend as well. But we are not here to recap the great sports weekend, though we could actually do that and have some fun with that. We're here to get into your recruiting questions. Always appreciate you guys joining the conversation here on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter as well. This week's question comes from Steve Pfeiffer, Sparky out in Milwaukee, friend of mine, who writes in, which states do you wish the Huskers recruited better? And there's a lot of different ways that you could actually go with this topic. And I'll actually let Steve kind of go first, because he had a few that came to mind immediately as to where he would like to see Nebraska recruit more. So, Steve, what's on your mind?
Right away, I thought offensive line. And so, Big Ten offensive lines, who do I like? I've always, I think a lot of people just respect what Wisconsin and the Iowas and the Minnesotas have done with their offensive lines recently over the years. And, if you look at those rosters, it's a lot of those states. It's Wisconsin, it's Minnesota, throw in some Illinois, just Iowa produces a lot of big, nasty guys. We just need more of that, I think, at Nebraska. And I think if you asked Scott Frost, I think he'd agree with that. So I just think those states kind of came to me off the top of my head, just those Midwestern states like Wisconsin, Minnesota, Illinois, and Iowa too.
Yeah, and a part of me still wonders if some of this is lingering from Nebraska joining the Big Ten. And though it's been 10-ish years now since that happened, I still think that there's been an adjustment when it comes to like Nebraska recruiting inside of that Big Ten footprint, because that's essentially what you just described is the Big Ten footprint, where other Big Ten teams that you're going to play on a weekly basis, especially on your side of the division, like where those teams reside and where they make their hay in recruiting. And it's so interesting with Wisconsin because specifically, and Iowa is really like this too, actually, where they recruit a lot of like in-state, like from their own state, and just kind of groom these offensive linemen. Wisconsin, especially, man. If you go look at Wisconsin's roster, and I'll put this in the kind of expanded version of this. It always goes live at 6 p.m. when we do the video for the recruiting notebook. Is that if you just take a peek at Wisconsin's line and their linemen, it is chock full of Wisconsin kids that first of all, they're from Wisconsin, but B, that they weren't highly recruited. Like it's been a very recent phenomenon that Wisconsin has started to get like higher end recruits and beat out like big name schools for these guys. Like it's usually these guys that kind of come out of nowhere and you don't see them until they're like fourth year juniors and they're monsters out there. And that's why it feels like they're just plugging and playing guys at all times.
That just speaks to their developmental program that they have over there, and the coaches, and just taking these guys and spending some years on their bodies, and when it's time, it's they go out there and they don't seem to miss a beat very often in run blocking and pass blocking, and just being an overall making a physical program, which I think a lot of people around here would love for Nebraska to do, and maybe not their rivals in the Big Ten West, but it's just something to respect about the Wisconsins and Iowas and now Minnesota's recently. I'll have to look up the history of, I guess, Iowa. I don't know if it's kind of viewed as like a offensive line kind of dominant type program, but recently they've had some really good offensive lines up there for PJ Fleck. I know a lot of people probably don't want to admit that, but they kind of have to. So
yeah, they will begrudgingly admit that,
yeah,
I suppose. And really, this is on topic, but not there. I think Minnesota's commitment to running the football,
yeah.
you know what you're going to get. You know that they're going to try and do that, and they're still able to execute it. I think that most football fans, even just outside of Nebraska, would respect that. But the PJ Fleck thing is just a whole nother situation. That Nebraska's not alone. Nebraska fans aren't alone in that. But one other state that I definitely wanted to highlight here for me, Missouri, right? And then this comes up quite a bit around here. Missouri, specifically St. Louis, and then the Kansas City area, right? And I think that St. Louis is a place that just we've seen like talented guy after talented guy go to all sorts of big time programs around the country. You've seen Ohio State has really planted a flag in that area and does a great job of recruiting those guys and pulling talent out of there. And now you've got like SEC schools are constantly going in there as well. The same thing though is now starting to shift and expand out towards Nebraska on the map to get towards Kansas City, because a lot of teams now are recruiting the Kansas City area as well. So it really was kind of unfortunate timing for Nebraska to lose that presence in that state, and they have over the last few years. I think the last player from Missouri that Nebraska signed was either Trey Bryan or Javon McQuitty. I don't remember which was first. That's been a while, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking about of years now of kind of striking out there, and so I think Nebraska being able to get back into those states get back into that state would also be really helpful. But the competition is not getting any easier.
Yeah, that's a great state with Missouri, and you brought up another great point that kind of goes along with it's not going to get any easier if you want to attempt to do it. But Texas, I'd like to get your thoughts on Texas, because it's another state that a lot of people obviously recruit. Ohio State does very well. I think some of the receivers, really good receivers that they've gotten over there in Columbus have come from the Lone Star State. So what are your thoughts on Texas and Nebraska? Does Brian Applewhite, the addition of him to the staff, kind of help out the chances there?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I think it helps. What it helps too is he comes from a place in TCU that was very good at identifying under the radar guys, or guys that just needed a little bit of development time, and then they'd be able to take off running, right? Kind of the same way with the person that's now running Nebraska's recruiting operations, Vince Ginter, right? He came from Baylor. They were a lot the same way, right? And I think that having those two guys kind of identifying talent down in Texas and also having kind of name recognition down there, paired with Nebraska has still good brand recognition in Texas. And I think I wrote about this in a notebook a couple of weeks ago, and talking to Brian Applewhite about the difference when he went down in Texas high schools with that Nebraska polo on. People knew him like that. That was it, and they knew Nebraska, and especially the high school coaches. So I definitely think that continuing to up the presence there is helpful. There's just so many players, right? And while you do have a lot of competition, but you also have the opportunity to really find hidden gems down there just by the nature of how many different players are down there and how much good football is played across the state of Texas. And I think Nebraska being a play, like, you don't have to go into high schools in Texas and explain who Nebraska is or what Nebraska football is, right? There's a value in that versus when Nebraska goes to like Georgia or Alabama, which they've been pretty good at both, right? Sean Beck and Travis Fisher and those guys do a really nice job down there. There was definitely a learning curve though, right? They had to explain like what Nebraska was all about and what it was like in Nebraska to those guys in a way that they just don't have to do with Texas. So yeah, I think that it definitely can be something that Applewhite and others help with.
I like that you mentioned that TCU and Baylor, they aren't really viewed as like the top dogs in Texas maybe, but they still do really well. And that's, look at the head coaches there. Dave Randa, he's turned that into a very, very solid, tough program over there at Baylor. And I know he's not there right now. He kind of got separated with the two, but with Gary Patterson at TCU too, just been there for a long time, knows how to run a program. And those two programs, TCU and Baylor, are doing things right now. And, it's, identifying talent and maybe being aware of which guys you can get and which ones you're more likely to get. Like, I think that's kind of a skill unto itself, really.
Yeah, absolutely. That, like, being able to navigate all of that is a whole separate deal, because it's just very difficult. Everybody wants to go like pick the like top 25 players in the country,
Of course.
and give them offers and do that. Like, everybody wants to do that, but that's not realistic, and it's really not how you could build a football team anyway. Even if you were getting all 25 of them every year, it would be really difficult to blend a team that way. So yeah, you have to be able to identify who you can actually get, because there's only so much time, right? Like, guys work really hard in recruiting, but there's only so much time. And so really figuring out a way to hone in on which of these states Nebraska needs to be focusing on, I think is a real key, especially as they reshape what's happening in the recruiting department right now.
Yeah, yeah, and one thing that kind of popped in my head right now with when we were talking about Brian Applewhite in Texas, was maybe this is an opportunity for Donovan Raiola, former Wisconsin player, to head up
Mhm.
to the alma mater and just kind of, walk around some of those schools around that area and see if he can get anybody interested in Nebraska. So that would be something to watch going forward too.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. I do think that they're trying to do that. And that will be something to watch, because he knows that formula. He obviously knows what's happening here in the history of Nebraska, but him having experience at another Big Ten school that produces really good offensive lines, and he himself having been a good offensive lineman too, I think that really, really helps him to have just kind of a varied experience and background to bring to the table. But all right, that's going to go ahead and do it for us today. Make sure you're checking out that recruiting notebook, like I mentioned earlier. It should be appointment reading every day, well, Sunday through Thursday, or Sunday through Thursday on hailvarsity.com. Make sure you like this video, subscribe, tell a friend, continue the conversation in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, and we will catch you next week.